When Lily Mercer appeared at the entrance to the Long Lake Ranger Station in June 2011, she was almost unrecognizable. Barefoot, emaciated, with long matted hair and wearing a tattered forest jacket in place of proper clothing. She had gone missing 6 years earlier, along with her father in one of the most remote and inaccessible areas of the Adirondacks, where both were presumed dead. But the most terrifying thing was not her appearance. The most terrifying thing was what those 6 years had left on Lily's body, what had happened to her father, and about the person who might still be living deep in that forest. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On the morning of October 14, 2005, Daniel Mercer, 42 years old, and his daughter Lily Mercer, 13 years old, left the Adirondack Low at around 7:15 a.m. to hike the Indian Pass Trail, a route Daniel had been familiar with for many years. He had planned carefully departure and return times, the planned lunch spot, and a loop route passing near Summit Rock before returning to the trailhead in the late afternoon. For Lily, this was her first long hike, so Daniel brought full topo maps, a short-range radio, a compass, and all the gear needed for a day trip. When they left the parking lot, the weather was recorded as stable, 52 degrees Fahrenheit, light winds, clear skies. The staff at Adirondack Low noted nothing unusual when they set out. By late morning, a cold air mass moving down from the north caused clouds to lower quickly, creating a thick fog layer covering the valleys and gorges in the high peaks area. Visibility dropped significantly in just 1 hour. Other hikers later reported that trails near Indian Pass had become much harder to navigate than usual. Around 1 p.m., Daniel made his routine radio check-in, as was his habit when in the woods, but the signal was noisy, with only a few seconds of interrupted audio received before it cut out completely. The radio failure did not immediately raise alarm because the terrain in the area was known to have many dead zones, but it did make tracking the father and daughter's progress harder to pinpoint. By around 5:30 p.m., it began getting dark quickly due to thick clouds and heavy fog, but Daniel and Lily had still not appeared at the trailhead as scheduled in their itinerary log. The staff at Adirondack Low checked the parking lot again and confirmed that Daniel's vehicle was still there. The Mercer family, after waiting nearly another hour and trying to reach them by cell phone and radio without success, immediately called some acquaintances in the area to check if the pair might have changed routes, but no one had any new information. When the time passed 7 p.m., with still no sign, the family's concern escalated sharply. They contacted Adirondack Lodge again to double confirm that the father and daughter had not returned or left any message. At around 8:27 p.m., with all contact attempts failing and worsening weather making further waiting too dangerous, the Mercer family officially reported them missing to the New York State Police. The call was received that same evening of October 14, 2005, and immediately activated the full emergency search protocol for the High Peaks area under the standards of the Department of Environmental Conservation. Within 90 minutes, the night duty rangers at Adirondack Lodge were ordered to deploy an initial team toward Indian Pass, conducting a quick sweep of trails near the trailhead to determine if Daniel and Lily Mercer might have backtracked via an alternate route in poor visibility. When the initial sweep found no sign they had returned, the on-scene commander immediately escalated the response to Lost Hiker Response, a level requiring greater manpower and scope, since the missing persons included both an adult and a minor. At dawn on October 15th, the fog in the area thickened unusually, forming a blanket over the valleys and lower trails in Indian Pass. Despite the difficult conditions, the ESR teams began deploying in standard formation, ground teams along the main trail, 2 K9 units released at points most likely to pick up scent, and a state police aviation helicopter dispatched from Lake Clear for FLIR sweeps. However, FLIR use was limited due to fog-reducing thermal contrast, and the crew could only provide blurry images of the area above Avalanche Pass. On the first day of the operation, rangers prioritized the area from Indian Pass to Wallface, where narrow gorges could easily cause someone to lose the trail or slip. The only trace recorded was a slight scuff in the dirt beside an exposed root, but it was not clear enough to determine cause and could not be confirmed as related to Daniel or Lily. On the second day, weather continued to worsen, forcing the commander to shift tactics to a grid search pattern, bringing in more than 40 volunteers, mostly members of the Adirondack Mountain Club. CR divided the search area into 500-meter grids, starting from Indian Pass toward flowed lands, to check for any signs of movement, fresh boot prints, mud impressions, recently broken branches with high freshness, or displaced moss or vegetation. At 2 points near the Indian Pass brook marker, K9s briefly picked up human scent, but the signals quickly faded on the wet rock sections, a known weakness of scent tracking. By the third day, the helicopter crew reported no detection of reflective gear or unusual movement from the air. Meanwhile, ground teams noted some faint marks resembling child-sized boot prints, but deformed by overnight rain, making conclusions uncertain. After the initial 48-72 hours, per protocol, the overall SR commander decided to expand the search to adjacent areas. Avalanche Pass, Lake Colden, flowed lands and side trails leading to Mount Marshall. This was the most manpower-intensive phase, with over 70 people operating simultaneously, including 4 K9 teams, 2 air crews, and many experienced long-distance hiking groups. Rangers checked common accident sites like the old Avalanche Slide, talus fields below Mount Marshall, and areas prone to wind drift disorientation, a phenomenon common when hikers lose direction in fog. Throughout the first week, no discovery was considered a critical lead. This shifted the search to a trail tracking model, comparing topo maps with Daniel's known hiking habits, analyzing possible off-trail movements, especially unofficial paths left by locals or hunters. Still, none of those areas provided clear evidence. Entering the second week, with colder weather and shorter days, deployed forces were adjusted to prevent exhaustion. Helicopter sorties were reduced to 1-2 per day. K9 teams were used only in high scent retention areas, like along water sources or sheltered spots. Some volunteer groups were rotated out to sustain long-term numbers. Rangers noted that the entire area had been swept at least twice, but still showed no signs of accident, camping, or dropped items. The absence of any fabric scraps, food wrappers, fire remnants, or survival signs led the commander to classify the situation as one of the most difficult on the Adirondacks SR scale. On the 15th day, after consulting with the Mercer family and deck representatives, the case was shifted to recovery search status, prioritizing locating remains or artifacts over live rescue, a standard decision for prolonged missing persons cases in rugged terrain. Over the next 60 days, SAR continued sweeps, but at reduced frequency, focusing mainly on high-risk spots like deep drops, strong streams, recent rock slides, and early snow areas. Each week saw only about 8-12 participants, rotating from the regional ranger roster. Many forest sections were marked as thoroughly searched, ruling out the pairs still being in the immediate vicinity. When the 90-day mark passed without any progress, no items found, no device signals, no fresh prints, no civilian sightings, Sarah was forced to agree to close active search operations and move the case to open file status per New York State Police regulations for unresolved missing persons cases. It became one of the largest-scale operations with completely empty results, making the disappearance of Daniel and Lily Mercer recorded as one of the most inexplicable mysteries in the Adirondacks during the early 2000s. The next 6 years passed in absolute silence, until the morning of June 3, 2011, near the Long Lake Ranger Station, when a patrolling ranger noticed unusual movement along the dirt road leading to the northern maintenance area of the station. Upon approaching, he saw a young woman in severe exhaustion, her body emaciated to the bone, clothes torn and filthy, barely able to stand. She managed a few steps before staggering and collapsing just as the ranger reached her. After an initial assessment confirming no immediate life-threatening injuries, the ranger performed on-site emergency aid procedures, providing water, shielding her from the sun, and radioing the station to request medical transport. At that point, the girl was barely responsive, able to utter only scattered words, not enough to provide identity or origin information. However, the ranger noted her apparent age corresponded to a teenager between 13 and 18, raising suspicion of a possible link to prior missing persons cases in the Adirondacks. While being brought back to the station to await transport, the ranger noticed several features matching the file photo of Lily Mercer, who disappeared with her father in 2005. Though not officially concluding anything, he immediately reported to NY State Police per protocol. The Long Lake EMS ambulance arrived within 10 minutes and transported her to the nearest hospital under continuous medical monitoring. At the hospital, doctors conducted a rapid assessment and recorded severe depletion with signs of prolonged malnutrition over many years. As Lily began responding better to IV fluids and monitoring, the medical team contacted NY State Police to report that the patient was likely connected to an unresolved missing persons case. NYSP sent 2 investigators to the hospital for initial information gathering. Based on identifying features such as moles, a small scar on the left hand, and facial structure, the investigators confirmed she strongly resembled Lily Mercer, reported missing at age 13. Confirmation could not be immediate due to the need for family file comparison, but the investigators quickly reported to headquarters that the match probability was very high. During examination, the hospital noted no possessions or identification on her. Aside from the torn and dirty clothing, there were no personal items to aid identification. This led NY State Police to believe this could be a case of long-term survival in isolation or under unclear circumstances. The next question raised was about the father, Daniel Mercer, since the initial ranger report from Long Lake indicated only Lily was found. There was no evidence Daniel had been near the area or traveled with his daughter recently. NYSP immediately reviewed ranger station patrol reports, checked traffic cameras along the Long Lake area, and contacted water patrol teams to verify if anyone had seen Daniel. All responses were negative. Lily, appearing alone after 6 years missing, immediately put NYSP in an urgent situation. If Daniel was alive, he could be in danger. If deceased, investigators needed to determine cause and location as soon as possible. Thus, the first priority was absolute identity confirmation to verify the found person was indeed the child missing since 2005. NYSP submitted fingerprint and DNA comparison requests to the lab per standard protocol for long-term missing cases. The fingerprints, though worn from skin peeling due to years of malnutrition, were clear enough for the AFIS system to return a match with the 2005 file. However, per regulations, investigation did not rely on a single indicator. Lily's blood sample was immediately analyzed for DNA and compared to genetic data stored from the Mercer family during the 2005 search. Results showed a complete 1-1 match with no discrepancies. Identity verification was completed on June 4, 2011. Less than 24 hours after Lily was found. As soon as identity was confirmed, NY State Police reclassified the file per federal standards from ordinary missing persons to kidnapping and long-term captivity due to the over 6-year disappearance and body condition, indicating she could not have survived naturally in the wild for that duration. The initial medical report, combined with her discovery condition, met criteria to consider this a case likely involving confinement, isolation, or restricted movement over a long period. Once preliminary assessment was complete, the Mercer file was transferred to the FBI per regulations for federal kidnapping cases, especially with a minor victim at the time of disappearance. The FBI field office in Albany immediately sent a team of investigators to coordinate with NY State Police for initial information intake. In parallel, the U.S. Marshals Service was notified due to the multi-year duration and potential for the perpetrator to have crossed state lines. Lily appearing more than 40 straight-line miles from the original disappearance site led the investigative team to conclude the victim may have been moved through multiple unmarked areas over the 6 years. Federal agencies immediately established a joint communication line with Troop B, requesting retrieval of all 2005 SR data, route maps, weather reports, and previously noted but unsubstantiated suspicious points. The digital Mercer file was recovered and reorganized into a standard long-term missing juvenile recovery case format, ensuring all data from 2005 to 2011 could be cross-referenced, analyzed, and extracted systematically. From the moment the FBI joined, the case officially entered a multi-agency investigation phase, and all information related to Lily was placed under strict confidentiality, limiting external access to avoid impacting steps to determine origin, movement history, and Daniel Mercer's status. NYSP officially updated the case classification code, shifting from missing persons, open file, to active federal-assisted kidnapping investigation. This allowed the team to use expanded federal analytical tools, including real-time satellite data, databases of interstate transient offenders, and old reports of unusual activity in the Adirondacks forest. Lily's appearance after 6 years missing, along with clear signs she could not have survived the harsh Adirondacks conditions alone, immediately shifted the Mercer file from a mysterious disappearance to a case likely involving prolonged criminal activity. NYSP officially reactivated full investigative procedures, coordinating with federal agencies to determine what happened during Lily's 6 missing years and why she appeared alone near Long Lake, with no sign of Daniel. In that context, the next step became urgent: accurately assessing Lily's medical condition to understand under what circumstances she had lived. Immediately after her identity was confirmed, the hospital began conducting a comprehensive examination according to the protocol for victims suspected of long-term captivity, including physical examination, blood tests, full-body X-rays, nutritional assessment, and analysis of soft tissue damage. Initial results recorded severe malnutrition, with a BMI nearly 40% below the average standard for a 19-year-old young woman, accompanied by signs of prolonged malabsorption and micronutrient deficiencies. Doctors immediately noticed that Lily's skin had an abnormally pale complexion, indicating severe lack of light exposure, commonly seen in individuals confined in enclosed environments or without sunlight contact for extended periods. Bone density was significantly reduced, and X-ray results showed that Lily had experienced at least 2 old fractures, one in the ribs and one in the forearm, that had healed on their own, but not in the proper alignment, indicating that recovery occurred without medical intervention. These traces could not have formed under natural living conditions in the wilderness without appropriate medical care, leading the medical team to conclude that the girl had lived under severe movement restrictions. In addition to bone injuries, numerous thick calluses were discovered on the wrists and ankles, with uniform circular shapes and symmetrical distribution. Upon detailed analysis, the forensic doctor concluded that these were not accidental injuries from friction with clothing or tree branches, but rather patterns matching damage from ropes or hard objects wrapped around for prolonged periods. The depth and direction of pressure on the skin indicated that the binding points were fixed in a manner that partially restricted movement, not temporary restraints used for transport or short-term detention. This reinforced the assessment that Lily had been held in a confined space, only large enough to sit or lie down, and possibly fixed in place at certain times. On Lily's scalp and fingernails, numerous patches of clay particles, ash, and small wood fibers were found. These samples were collected for analysis, as they could help identify the environment where she was held. Doctors also noted mild vision impairment, a common sign in continuously low-light environments. Lily's respiratory tract showed signs of inflammation from prolonged exposure to stagnant air or high-humidity environments, another indicator suggesting that the captivity area might be underground or in a sealed structure with poor natural ventilation. Lily's mobility was also significantly impaired. During muscle strength testing, doctors observed marked atrophy in the leg and back muscles, consistent with limited walking over an extended period. The way Lily reacted when entering a brightly lit room or when exposed to direct strong light further supported the conclusion that she had lived in low-light conditions for many years. After completing the physical assessment, The hospital proceeded to collect information that could aid the investigation. All samples of soil, pollen, wood fibers, and ash were sealed, coded, and sent to the crime scene analysis lab of the NY State Police. The restraint marks were measured, photographed, and evaluated for binding force to determine the type of material possibly used. The forensic doctor recommended analyzing the shape of the restraint marks to trace the type of rope and its origin. Unevenly healed bone injuries were documented with high-resolution X-rays to serve comparisons with potential accidents or acts of violence. The comprehensive medical report sent to the NYSP clearly stated Lily's condition was inconsistent with any scenario of being lost in the wilderness for 6 years. Instead, all signs pointed to long-term captivity in a confined space with restricted movement and lack of light exposure. Blood micronutrient levels indicated a poor, monotonous, and repetitive diet, completely different from the diverse foraging diet a wilderness survivor would typically seek. Prolonged protein deficiency and bone mineral loss suggested that her food sources were likely restricted and controlled by someone else. In the report to the investigation team, doctors emphasized 2 decisive points. 1. The environmental microparticles adhering to Lily's body most likely directly reflected the area where she was held. And 2. The pattern of muscle bone damage combined with restraint marks indicated a nearly fixed captivity environment with very little change, rather than a situation where the victim was frequently moved. This was critical information, as it suggested a specific, stable location where Lily was held for an extended period. The entire medical record was handed over to the interagency investigation team on June 6, 2011, along with the recommendation to conduct in-depth analysis of environmental materials to trace the sources of soil, wood, ash, and pollen, in order to identify the corresponding geographic area within the Adirondacks. Upon receiving this record, the NY State Police Crime Scene Analysis Lab immediately proceeded to the next step, tracing the origin of all substances adhering to Lily's body and clothing. Samples of soil, pollen, wood fibers, ash microparticles, and even small insect samples were fully collected, sealed according to forensic standards, and transferred to the Environmental Laboratory in Albany for detailed analysis. The goal was to identify the geological-biological characteristics of these samples that matched which area in the Adirondacks, thereby narrowing down the plausible location where Lily was held for 6 years. First, the soil analysis team separated the samples by body and clothing regions, samples taken from the wrists, ankles, inside the shirt, hem of the pants, and especially from the fingernails, where environmental material often naturally accumulates when the victim scratches or has prolonged contact with soil surfaces. Mineral particle analysis revealed that the soil composition consisted of a mixture of black clay with high manganese content, accompanied by a small proportion of hematite, a characteristic sign in areas with previous iron ore mining activity from the last century. In the Adirondacks, not many areas have this type of soil, and geological maps quickly identified matching points, mainly around Henderson Lake, Calamity Brook, and the Tahawus area, where old iron mines and abandoned railroad systems once served the industrial zone. Next, the pollen analysis experts examined pollen found in the clothing. The pollen primarily belonged to 3 groups: red pine, forest maple, and a wild grass species that only appears in high humidity areas near natural watercourses around Henderson Lake. The match between the pollen types in this area was noteworthy, as the aforementioned grass is not widely distributed in the Adirondack high peaks, but concentrated in clusters along transitional forests near Calamity Brook and a small part of Old Tahawus. The team also examined microscopic insects adhering to the shirt hem and pants. Several beetle larvae from the genus Tenebrionidae were found, which typically live in dark, moist soil within decayed wood structures or deep soil layers, with little light. This was an important indicator that Lily's environment was not outdoors, but a sealed structure, possibly a wooden cabin, old warehouse, or even an underground structure. Additionally, Fine black ash adhering to the wrists and pant cuffs originated from incompletely burned wood containing many oxidized iron impurities, matching wood sources around the abandoned mining area where many trees absorbed abnormally high iron from the soil. When cross-referenced with other areas in the Adirondack High Peaks, the analysis team nearly eliminated the entire eastern region due to lack of equivalent manganese concentrations in the soil. Western areas like Colden, Marcy Dam, and Avalanche Pass were also excluded due to mismatched insect traces. The pollen obtained from Lily's clothing was not consistent with the pollen distribution around Indian Pass, where the father and daughter initially disappeared, reinforcing the argument that she had been moved or taken to a completely different area after vanishing. From the initial 25 square kilometers area circled when the case was reactivated, the analysis team narrowed it down to approximately 11 square kilometers within the triangle of Henderson Lake, Calamity Brook, Tahowas. This was a dense forest region, located between little-known trails, far from tourist areas, and with geology matching the samples from Lily. The environmental investigation team continued to separate wood microparticles found in Lily's fingernails and hair. The wood cell structure indicated they belonged to a softwood species, decayed over time, common in old structures built in the early 20th century at auxiliary facilities of the Tahowas mine. Some remaining wood fibers showed rough cut marks, suggesting tools with dull blades, possibly knives, axes, or hand saws used for many years. When reviewing historical data, NYSP determined that this area once had many abandoned worker cabins and auxiliary structures from the 1940s, 1960s, some deep in the forest and not appearing on popular hiking maps. Environmental investigators then conducted further analysis of the soil adhering under Lily's fingernails. They discovered traces of a mold species characteristic of enclosed environments with stable year-round humidity. This mold only grows in spaces without natural ventilation, relatively dry but with high baseline humidity, such as soil floors in storage sheds, basement rooms, or old wooden cellars. This finding led the investigation team to determine that the place where Lily was held was more likely a man-made structure than a natural cave. Continuing the cross-referencing process, the laboratory noted the presence of microfossils, a form of plant spores preserved in soil layers formed from sediment in Henderson Lake over decades. This match further narrowed the radius of suspicion. When all data layers were overlaid, the suspected area quickly narrowed from 25 square kilometers to only about 6 square kilometers of deep forest, located between trails that are almost no longer used. An area that the 2005 SAR team had deemed too complex and too far from the expected route to prioritize searching. This discovery gave NY State Police their first specific focus point, with sufficient basis to view the Henderson Lake, Calamity Brook, Tahowas area, not just as part of the vast Adirondacks, but as a key zone needing re-examination as a potential crime scene. The analysis from Lily's body had transformed an undefined range into a clear target, paving the way for the next phase of the investigation. Immediately thereafter, NYSP coordinated with the High Peaks Ranger team to shift to the phase of terrain cross-referencing and modeling possible perpetrator movement, a critical step to determine how the offender could access, leave, and operate in the area. First, the Rangers gathered all large-scale topo maps, current trail maps, elevation grids, geological maps, and diagrams of old mining facilities around the Tahowas mine to begin analyzing the forest movement behavior of the person who held Lily for 6 years. They used behavioral movement simulation models in dense forest terrain, considering factors such as slope, forest density, and distance to water sources to identify routes an adult could regularly travel over many years without detection. Possible movement routes were drawn into 2 groups, the first consisting of unofficial trails, paths left by longtime forest travelers, hunters, or old workers. The second consisting of natural animal trails wide enough for human use. This classification aimed to determine which paths the perpetrator might have used to access food, clean water, or observe surroundings while avoiding detection. Initial analysis results showed that most likely routes were in the southern Henderson Lake area and along Calamity Brook, where the terrain features gentle slopes interspersed with dense pine forests, creating wind-protected and visually obscured environments from aerial views. One important criterion the rangers considered was the ability to conceal a cabin or captivity structure. To remain undetected by 2005 SR reconnaissance for many years, the captivity location had to meet 4 factors outside main trail ranges: thick tree canopy cover, natural terrain shielding from helicopter views, and nearby water source without excessive exposure. When evaluating each area against these criteria, most marked abandoned cabins on old maps were immediately excluded. Cabins near main trails around Henderson Lake were unsuitable because SR had passed through and would certainly detect any signs of activity. Some cabins near the Calamity Brook Trail were deemed unfeasible due to openness and intermittent use by hikers, lacking the concealment the perpetrator needed. Auxiliary facilities once part of the Tahawas mine were considered, but mostly located near old roads or flat accessible areas, making long-term use as a captivity site nearly impossible to evade patrols. The rangers continued cross-referencing topo maps with slope models and natural drainage paths. A long-term forest resident perpetrator would choose neutral terrain, not too steep, avoiding exposed mountaintops, and not in seasonal flood risk areas. Using this data, the team eliminated western Tahawas slopes due to exposed terrain and slippery rocks that could cause noise during movement. Similarly, eastern Henderson Lake areas were excluded due to steep slopes, making transport of supplies or moving the victim in and out difficult. After filtering by slope criteria, maps were combined with forest density data. Rangers used medium-resolution satellite imagery from 2005-2011 to identify areas with stable canopies and minimal temporal change. Areas with dynamic canopies, affected by strong winds, winter storms, or natural treefall gaps, were removed from the list as unsuitable for concealing a structure over many years. This cross-referencing showed that the Calamity Brook area had the most stable forest density, least affected by strong winds, and capable of covering a cabin or wooden cellar without obvious aerial signs. Combining factors, the investigation team circled reasonable movement routes, a small worn path along a tributary of Calamity Brook, not on official hiking maps, but identified by displaced vegetation on both sides. A very faint trail into deep forest north of Tahawas, possibly an old small transport route for mine workers, and a natural deer trail near the western shore of Henderson Lake. These 3 routes formed a network that a terrain-familiar person could use to move between a shelter and water, or supply hiding spots without crossing any popular trails. When synthesizing all data, the suspected area, originally about 25 square kilometers from Lily's environmental report, was narrowed to approximately 12 square kilometers. This area lay between 3 points: the southern shore of Henderson Lake, the middle section of Calamity Brook, and the forest strip adjacent to northwest Tahawas. The region was far enough that the 2005 SR team did not consider it due to deviation from Daniel and Lily's expected route, yet close enough for the perpetrator to access via old trails or hidden routes without detection. The rangers also marked on the map a series of concave terrain points, low ground depressions, dry stream beds, and flat terraces deep in the forest. Positions discreet enough to conceal a cabin or even a subfloor structure. Though not appearing on any tourist maps or official mining records, these points perfectly matched the newly narrowed suspected area. When all the data was compiled into the first version of the suspect map, the NY State Police had the necessary foundation to shift from theoretical analysis to field surveys, determining whether there were signs of prolonged habitation in that 12 square kilometers forest area. With this map, the NYSP coordinated with rangers to begin deploying ground reconnaissance teams deep into the Henderson Lake, Calamity Brook, Tahawas area. During the very first survey trip, they approached an old lean-to, which did not appear on current maps, but was noted in a Forest Survey report from the 1980s. This lean-to was located on a wind-sheltered mound, surrounded by thick pine canopy, making it almost impossible to see from a distance. There, the rangers discovered ash from a small fire directly beneath the lean-to floor. The ash sample was collected and quickly analyzed using a field test kit, revealing carbon levels characteristic of relatively recent burned wood. When the sample was sent back to Albany, results showed the ash had formed within the last 12 to 24 months. This confirmed that the lean-to had been used in recent years, an immediate discovery that elevated this area to top priority. From the lean-to, the rangers expanded their search in a 500-meter radius and discovered a series of axe marks on tree trunks. These cuts were not typical of ordinary hikers, as they appeared in regular patterns, at consistent heights, and with matching cut patterns in multiple locations throughout the forest. Some marks were still quite fresh, with sharp edges not yet eroded by weather. By comparing them to wood fiber samples recovered from Lily's body, forensic experts confirmed that the cut surfaces and fiber breakage patterns matched, indicating the same tool, or at least the same type of blade, had created these marks. These continuous axe marks were interpreted as trail markers for someone living in the forest, or simply signs of clearing a hidden path for frequent travel. As the search continued, the rangers discovered a series of water collection points near Calamity Brook, including 2 locations with deep footprints in the same direction of travel, indicating repetition over many months or years. Nearby, 2 additional small fire ash sites were found, each corresponding to rudimentary cooking signs, a few stones arranged in a circle, partially burned wood pieces, and some fossilized food scraps. There were no signs of traditional camping such as food wrappers, aluminum foil or packaging, suggesting that the user of these fire sites was very careful to erase traces or simply lived in absolute minimal conditions. These traces were not common for typical hikers or hunters, as they were repetitive and spread along a fairly stable travel route. When the investigation team plotted all the trace locations on the map, a travel route pattern gradually emerged from the lean-to southward to a fixed water point, then crossing the forest along a very faint trail toward Tahawoos. This convinced the rangers that an individual had been living hidden in the forest here for an extended period, long enough to form stable travel habits between these points. When compared to the topo map, this suspected travel route lay outside most of the areas that the 2005 SAR team had scanned, explaining why signs of human activity had been missed. To reinforce this hypothesis, the rangers used handheld floor-ground thermal scanning devices to check the paths between the lean-to and Calamity Brook. Although no fresh heat signatures were found, they detected areas where grass had been pushed aside by passing objects in not too distant time, enough to suspect that this route was used by an individual walking regularly. On several nearby tree trunks, the rangers found bark scrapes at adult hand height, indicating someone had leaned or brushed against the trees while passing. These traces appeared 3-4 times along the same route, forming a natural corridor characteristic of a trail used repeatedly over a long period. Additionally, the investigation team discovered at some streamside points signs of rudimentary water filtering. Small dirt channels directing water into rock hollows, worn stones with continuous scraping marks, and disturbed mud traces. These marks were not made by animals, but clearly by humans in a repeated pattern, consistent with long-term habitation. Also within a few hundred meters of the lean-to, the rangers found a small clearing that appeared to have been used for drying items, with several cleanly cut branches, propped in an A-shape, functioning as a primitive drying rack. This arrangement was not typical of ordinary campers, as there were no signs of rope, hanging hooks, or any modern tools. All these signs, from fire ash, water points, axe marks, to faint trails, when combined, indicated the presence of an individual living hidden in the forest for many years. In particular, the travel pattern was very clear, starting possibly from the lean-to or a nearby structure, approaching water toward Calamity Brook, then looping westward along a hidden path. These routes all fell within the previously delineated 12 square kilometers suspect area, reinforcing the assessment that this direction was the focus for expanding the investigation. When all the data was input into spatial modeling software, the traces collected from the lean-to, water points, and small fire sites gradually appeared as interconnected links. They formed an arc converging on a dense forest strip between Henderson Lake and Calamity Brook, the area identified as the subject's repeated travel corridor, and immediately becoming the focal point for the next search phase. With the modeling clearly indicating a distinct activity corridor, the task for the ranger team and NY State Police was to determine which hidden path in that area led to the subject's long-term residence. When expanding the search scope based on the sketched travel route, one reconnaissance team scanned along a faint trail heading southwest of Calamity Brook, and there, a ranger discovered an anomaly. A cluster of pine branches erected in a way too deliberate to be natural, located right at the edge where two different vegetation zones met. Upon closer approach, the reconnaissance team noticed that these pine branches did not belong to the surrounding trees, but had been cut and interlocked to conceal a nearly invisible pathway. When gently pulling the branch layer aside, a narrow trail, only 40–50 centimeters wide, appeared. The trail surface was covered in leaf litter, but revealed patches of compacted soil in a consistent direction, indicating this route had been used with stable frequency over a long period. Field technicians measured soil compaction and analyzed structure, determining that the wear in this soil layer could not have been caused by just a few sporadic trips, but required an adult walking repeatedly for many months, even years. This further reinforced the hypothesis that this was the subject's hidden travel route. As they proceeded about 60 meters along the path, the investigation team discovered many cleanly cut but now decayed branches scattered along both sides. Some wood fragments mixed in the leaf litter had fiber breakage patterns, matching the wood samples recovered from Lily's hair during medical analysis. The field lab confirmed that the cut surfaces of these wood pieces were rough, with a dull blade leaving characteristic cut angles, matching the axe marks recorded at the lean-to and water areas. This indicated one person had used the same tool to maintain this concealed route, while directly linking the path to materials found on Lily's body. As the reconnaissance team continued another 200 meters deeper, the trail began to widen slightly, suggesting this area might be the center of the subject's regular activity. At a small junction, the investigation team found elongated drag marks from a heavy object on the ground, though faded by time and unidentifiable as to the item. However, the drag direction was consistent, going deeper into the forest in the same direction. The path became denser as it approached a gentle slope, with thicker canopy and significantly reduced light. By mid-afternoon, as the reconnaissance team moved another, approximately 300 meters, in the modeled direction, the lead ranger discovered areas on a thick moss bed where moss had been scratched, indicating someone had moved and contacted the moss surface not too long ago. Just beyond that area, a large fallen tree from years prior was found to have been hollowed, as if someone had tried to use the lower trunk as a barrier or concealment point. The forest floor beneath the tree revealed a finer soil layer, different in color from the surroundings, indicating artificial disturbance. About 20 meters past the tree, the path suddenly opened into a relatively flat clearing. There, the investigation team immediately recognized man-made structure, an old wooden cabin. This cabin did not appear on any official maps and was clearly a subsidiary structure from the Tahawas mining era decades earlier. The cabin was low, with a slanted roof, built from thick pine logs, partially rotted but still standing. Exterior wallboards had been replaced with various crude materials, such as newer wood patches nailed with rusty nails, proving the cabin had been manually repaired to maintain usability. The cabin door was concealed by multiple layers of dry branches and pine needles, apparently to reduce visibility from afar or prevent the cabin from standing out amid the forest canopy. What drew the investigation team's attention most was the surrounding area having soil compaction similar to the trail leading here. soil pressed in repeated directions, with a small but clear activity radius. There were no signs of campers or accidental hikers stopping by, as there was no trash, food packaging, or common travel gear. Instead, the cabin showed signs of frequent but discreet activity: a horizontally sawn log used as a bench, a sharpening stone near the door, and several partially cut small wood pieces scattered around. On the ground beside the cabin, the investigation team collected a 3 centimeters wood fragment with a cut completely matching the sample taken from Lily's hair, confirming that Lily had contact with materials in this area or had been inside the cabin. Cross-referencing the cabin location with the topo map and previous trace maps, experts quickly concluded this was the logical endpoint of the concealed trail and highly likely the activity center of the individual living hidden in the forest. The cabin site met all criteria: deep in the forest, far from main trails, completely shielded from aerial view by thick canopy, and near but not too close to water sources. The cabin also lay in a geological zone with soil composition matching samples from Lily's body. As the investigation team completed the initial report, the cabin was classified as a high-level suspect structure, with a very high probability of having been used as the long-term residence of the subject and directly related to Lily's disappearance. The discovery of the concealed trail leading straight to the cabin, along with numerous matching traces along the travel route, shifted the entire investigation to a new phase, from searching for signs of human presence to approaching a structure that could be the center of the entire case. With this level of suspicion, the next step became clear: to conduct a systematic forensic examination of the cabin, starting from the upper level. Immediately after the cabin was confirmed as the primary target, the Ranger team and NY State Police investigators deployed sealed crime scene processing procedures, approaching the door secured by a handmade wooden bar and a metal wire wrapped around the hinges. The Ranger opened the door by removing the bar without damaging the structure, showing the cabin was not heavily fortified, but sufficient to deter large animals or accidental hikers. Once the door was opened, the investigation team observed the entire upper level with specialized lights before stepping inside to avoid contaminating the scene. There were no signs that Lily had been on the upper level: no children's clothing, no items belonging to the female victim, and no evidence of dual occupancy activity. Inside the cabin was a damp smell mixed with characteristic wood smoke, matching ash samples found along the suspected travel route. The interior was sparse: a crude wooden bed with an old blanket, a table placed near the east wall, a series of survival tools hung on the wooden walls, and clear roof repair signs in the left corner, where newer, lighter-colored wood boards stood out. Under the bed, the team discovered personal items, including a folding knife, matches, worn paracord, and a thick, torn jacket. On the table was an empty canned food tin not yet fully rusted, next to a metal spoon reshaped from long-term use. The smell of ash and smoke, along with the wear on items, suggested the cabin had been used continuously for many years rather than as a short-term stop. On the cabin walls, technicians noted a row of new nail holes indicating recent roof repairs. The wood used for roof reinforcement had cut patterns similar to samples from the trail, showing the same tool type was used. This reinforced the hypothesis that the cabin was the activity center of the hidden resident and had been repaired to remain usable through multiple winters. On the table, forensic specialists collected 2 long black hairs and 1 short brown hair. These hairs were bagged as evidence since they did not belong to rangers or examination participants. Several faint fingerprints were found on the food tin lid and water pot handle, which were lifted for comparison against criminal databases. Additionally, in a wooden box under the wall shelf was a dull-bladed hunting knife with a cracked handle, very similar to the tool inferred to have made the axe marks along the trail. In the cabin corner, the wooden floor showed slight cracks from weight and uneven wear in many spots, characteristics matching repeated movement in a confined space. When measuring floor wear, technicians noted a rectangular area about 90 by 120 centimeters that appeared older than the rest, as if this surface had been removed, reinstalled, or subjected to repeated impact. When tapping with tools, this area produced a hollow sound compared to the rest of the floor. Mechanical probe vibration measurements confirmed a significant void beneath this area. There were no visible hinges or handles, but the wood at the edges of the suspect area showed slight wear, similar to a surface frequently pulled or pushed from above. This discovery was immediately flagged as a high suspicion point for a possible basement or underfloor space. On the wooden shelf near the door, the investigation team collected a rusted metal bowl and a nearly empty salt container, indicating minimal cooking use. Ash samples under the wood stove contained charcoal from multiple wood types, including pine and birch, showing the cabin user burned whatever fuel was readily available. When scanning the cabin with UV and specialized lights, investigators found no blood traces on the upper level, nor signs of struggle or impact. This reinforced the assessment that the upper level was primarily used for living, while any unusual activity involving the victim did not occur there. Additionally, the cabin had worn footpaths from the door to the cooking area and bed, but few footprints outside the main routes, indicating long-term repetitive living patterns. A crossbeam overhead had an old paracord section wrapped around it, but no clear signs of tying or heavy pulling. An old wooden barrel near the table contained items like a rusted needle, thick fabric scraps, a few nails, and wire pieces. This was a rudimentary cabin repair kit. The wear level on tools allowed estimation of at least several years of continuous use. Additionally, the cabin had a small recycled plank shelf holding 3 empty food cans and 2 labelless brown plastic bottles, possibly once containing water or other liquids. These items were collected for fingerprint and DNA analysis. When the entire upper cabin level was documented, the scene revealed a long-term living space with ongoing maintenance and repairs, belonging to a hidden individual with minimalist habits over many years. Most importantly, the hollow-sounding floor area with edgeware was marked as a high suspicion point, identified as the location requiring deeper examination due to the possible existence of a space beneath the cabin floor. After identifying the area of the cabin floor that could potentially conceal a void beneath it, the investigation team proceeded to open the trapdoor following the sealed crime scene control protocol. A technician used a metal probe and specialized prying tools to locate the edge of a removable plank. After a few minutes of examination, a rectangular plank was discovered that could be lifted thanks to a very small gap representing a crude hinge on the underside. When the plank was pried up, a layer of wood dust and dry leaves fell down, revealing a dark opening leading beneath the cabin. The descent was only about 70 centimeters wide and approximately 1.5 meters deep, with a half-rotted old wooden step nailed into the pit wall. The ranger shone a specialized light down below, revealing a narrow space with a low ceiling and no windows. Immediately, the forensic team deployed lighting and scene scanning procedures without allowing anyone to physically enter the pit before fully documenting all surfaces. Once the lighting was sufficient, the pit's structure became clear, a rectangular box-like space approximately 2.4 meters wide, nearly 3 meters long, and only about 1.3 meters high, not enough for an adult to stand upright. The pit walls were reinforced with rough wooden planks, most of which were rotted, showing black mold stains along the lower edges. The ceiling was formed by the cabin floor above, with many areas of wood discolored by long-term rising moisture. The pit had only one small ventilation hole in the corner wall, about 5 centimeters in diameter, drilled upward to the ground surface behind the cabin, but almost completely blocked by soil and decomposed leaves. Ventilation was extremely poor, consistent with the recorded health decline symptoms of Lily in her medical records. When the forensic team entered the pit, they immediately noted evidence matching Lily's condition. Along the left wall section was an old paracord restraint rope, about 1.6 meters long, one end fixed to a vertical wooden beam, the other end featuring a worn noose loop from friction. The rope was heavily frayed in the middle section, indicating it had endured prolonged tension. Not far away, the wall showed numerous clear scratch marks, scratches 2-4 centimeters long, running vertically with splintered wood. Some scratches still had broken fingernail fragments attached, which were subsequently collected into evidence bags. On the pit floor near the right corner, the team found dried dark brown stains suspected to be old blood. Field testing with a swab yielded a positive reaction for hemoglobin. The entire blood sample was collected for comparison. Right next to it, the dirt surface showed depressions, indicating this was likely where the victim had slept or lain for extended periods. This area had a thin rotted fabric layer with torn threads, consistent with a crude blanket or covering. Opposite the sleeping area was a small corner with a shallow dirt pit covered by stacked wood pieces, suspected to be the sanitation area. This basic layout indicated the pit was used as a forced living space over a prolonged period. Technicians also noted abnormally high moisture accumulation on wall surfaces, along with a heavy moldy odor, confirming the pit lacked ventilation and natural light. Several short hairs were found in the room corner, matching Lily's hair color, and were collected for DNA testing. Additionally, the wall section below the trapdoor showed a horizontally worn area of wood, as if a hard object or restraint had repeatedly rubbed against it. Another notable point was near the rope tie-off point, where the wall had two small holes like old nail marks, indicating the restraint position may have been adjusted or changed previously. When measuring distances between the sleeping area, restraint point, and sanitation area, investigators found the spaces very narrow, only 80 to 120 centimeters, confirming the victim's movement range was extremely restricted. This matched the muscle atrophy, lack of mobility, and prolonged malnutrition signs recorded in Lily's medical file. To assess the pit's usage duration, the forensic team used sediment analysis techniques on the floor. They discovered distinct layered dust, soil, and mold buildup, proving the pit was used not just for months, but showed signs of activity over many years. The mold layers at the wall bases, combined with rope wear at the tie-off point, allowed an estimate of minimum captivity duration of about 3 to 5 years, aligning with Lily's disappearance timeline. Additionally, the broken fingernail scratches showed varying ages, some fresher, some older, indicating wall scratching behavior occurred multiple times across different phases. Once all evidence was collected and cross-referenced, the investigation team issued a preliminary report concluding that the pit beneath the cabin was Lily's long-term confinement location. The cramped space, minimalist sleeping arrangement, fixed restraint marks, broken fingernail scratches, and dried blood samples all matched the signs documented on her body. The discovery of the secret pit under the cabin served as the key piece confirming the cabin was not only the suspect's living quarters, but also the primary scene of Lily's confinement throughout her years of disappearance, consistent with all prior environmental and medical data collected. Immediately after confirming the secret pit as Lily's confinement site for many years, the investigation team shifted to examining the entire perimeter area around the cabin to determine if any other traces related to the disappearance of the father and daughter remained. Within a roughly 20-meter radius around the cabin, rangers used ground-penetrating radar and specialized probing rods to detect abnormal distortions in the natural soil layers. After just a few hours of scanning, they identified an area of soil with differing compaction density, measuring about 1.2x, 1.8 meters, located behind the cabin, approximately 7 meters from the wooden wall. This patch had no vegetation growing, despite surrounding thick moss and grass, a common sign of previously disturbed and refilled soil. The surface also had small rocks scattered unnaturally, indicating prior manual intervention. As the forensic team removed the topsoil layer, they noted distinctly different moisture and soil color below, compared to the surrounding area, confirming past excavation. After removing about 20–30 centimeters of soil, the first long bone segment appeared. Specialists quickly cordoned off the area as an excavation scene and proceeded with controlled digging. Within 2 hours, a complete human skeleton was exposed, lying in a fetal position with the head tilted left and arms pressed against the chest. The body was buried shallowly, only about 40–50 centimeters deep, suggesting hasty burial. Surrounding decomposed plant material allowed estimation of burial timing consistent with the 2005 father-daughter disappearance. The skeleton was carefully recovered and transferred to a temporary forensic lab set up near the cabin for initial analysis. Upon examining teeth and bone structure, forensic experts confirmed male gender and age matching Daniel Mercer. Left and right ribs showed multiple fractures, some with sharp edges indicating strong external force before death. The skull had a large crack running from the left temple to the crown, consistent with direct blunt force trauma. There were no signs of post-mortem dragging, as surrounding soil showed no secondary disturbance. This suggested Daniel was likely attacked near the cabin, died quickly, and was buried temporarily nearby by the perpetrator. The sharp fracture edges with no healing signs proved injuries occurred immediately before or at death. Investigators also noted no restraint marks on wrist or ankle bones, indicating the perpetrator used direct attack rather than prolonged restraint. However, multiple rib fractures suggested Daniel was severely beaten or repeatedly struck before the fatal head blow. Near the excavation site, forensics recovered 3 wood fragments with old blood stains. Quick hemoglobin tests were positive, and blood samples matched Daniel's DNA profile. These fragments likely belonged to the weapon or object used in the attack. After completing scene analysis, the team concluded Daniel was attacked and killed around the time of the disappearance, likely within 24–48 hours of leaving Indian Pass. No evidence suggested prolonged captivity or multiple movements before death. Instead, data indicated the perpetrator targeted Daniel early to eliminate the adult and facilitate control over Lily. The shallow burial near the cabin with no long-term concealment efforts further suggested opportunistic yet intentional criminal behavior, fitting the profile of a forest-dwelling offender. More importantly, cross-referencing Daniel's time of death with Lily's medical analyses confirmed she was held for many years after his murder, with no paternal presence in any subsequent phase after the perpetrator brought victims to the cabin. This affirmed Lily was kept alone in the cabin pit throughout her prolonged disappearance, and discovering Daniel's body reinforced the entire chain of reasoning about the perpetrator's initial attack and her immediate isolation afterward. After recovering Daniel's body and completing preliminary examinations of the cabin and confinement pit, the investigation team began reconstructing the perpetrator's full behavioral sequence during the 2005 Mercer father-daughter disappearance, focusing on site selection, timing, and attack method. Cross-referencing weather data, 2005 SI reports, and the last recorded position on Indian Pass Trail, investigators determined the perpetrator likely stalked or ambushed beforehand. Indian Pass features deep gorges, dense forest, steep slopes, and limited visibility, especially with sudden weather changes on the disappearance day. It is not a high-traffic tourist area. Narrow, sheltered trail sections between rock faces allowed an ambusher to hide undetected from distance. The perpetrator's choice of this location showed strong local terrain knowledge and ability to assess natural choke points victims had to pass. Reconstructing the pair's likely route from 2005 traces and SI records, analysts concluded Daniel's radio silence timing coincided with sections prone to strong downdrafts, disrupting signals, further enabling unnoticed approach. Based on Daniel's injuries, rib fractures, blunt skull trauma, investigators assessed quick surprise attack with heavy force and no prolonged struggle. This indicated preference for neutralizing the adult threat first, before focusing on the primary target. In behavioral modeling, the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit concluded the perpetrator very likely observed the pair briefly before striking, waiting for Daniel's distraction or terrain disadvantage. The contrast between Daniel's injuries and Lily's prolonged ordeal revealed clear tactics: rapid adult elimination followed by transport to a pre-prepared confinement site. The cabin and secret pit, built or modified from an old mining structure, proved the perpetrator identified the holding location long before abducting Lily. This reflected need for absolute control, minimized discovery risk, and enabled long-term reclusive forest life, similar to FBI-recorded patterns in peripheral urban abductions. Targeting a minor also indicated preference for controllable, fully dependent victims with low resistance likelihood. Maintaining Lily alive for years, despite harsh conditions, showed no immediate lethal intent, but rather long-term possession, fitting control-oriented, rather than homicidal offender models. Based on concealed trails, stream water collection, recent lean-to ashes, and matching knife marks, the team determined the perpetrator followed fixed routines, leaving the cabin for supplies, firewood, water, then returning to the pit. Maintaining hidden paths showed deliberate avoidance of main trails while establishing repeatable movement habits, allowing prolonged criminal activity undetected. Synthesizing all factors, remote site selection, rapid ambush, adult elimination first, minor targeting, long-term holding facility, sustained reclusive routines, BO concluded this was a deliberate, prepared and stably maintained behavioral pattern over years. This allowed shifting focus to perpetrator profiling via behavioral aggregate rather than physical evidence alone, a critical step to narrow suspects and understand operations throughout Lily's captivity years. Immediately after the perpetrator's behavioral model was established, the interagency investigation team began the phase of reconstructing in detail the entire timeline from the day the Mercer father and daughter went missing until the day Lily reappeared near Long Lake in 2011. Constructing this timeline required synthesizing information from the cabin, the captivity cellar, the surrounding area, as well as microbiological data, fireplace ash, waste, charred wood samples, food remnants, and abrasion samples from the restraints. All physical evidence was categorized by relative chronological groups, then subjected to decay measurements to establish absolute timing. Organic materials such as dried food crumbs, packaging fragments, and natural fiber threads were microbiologically tested layer by layer. Meanwhile, fireplace ash and charred wood samples were analyzed for burn rings, oxidation levels, and soil bacteria infiltration to estimate the times the fireplace was used. In particular, the multi-layered ash accumulation near the cabin entrance helped determine the perpetrator's activity cycles over the years. From this, the investigation team was able to divide the timeline into 4 main phases. The phase where the perpetrator settled into the hideout, the phase of regular activity and tight control over Lily, the phase of declining supplies and behavioral fluctuations, and the phase ending the control cycle before Lily escaped or was released. Through analysis of hair and remaining skin samples in the cellar, the forensic team clearly identified irregular captivity periods. There were times when Lily was restrained continuously for months, interspersed with periods of less restraint, possibly due to the perpetrator being ill or leaving the cabin for extended periods to forage for supplies. The abrasion marks on the synthetic fiber restraints showed they were retightened multiple times in regular cycles, reflecting control over the victim's body over the years. For each segment of rope found, experts analyzed polymer aging characteristics to determine which year it was used most heavily. Results indicated that 2007 and 2009 were the 2 periods when Lily was more tightly restrained and severely restricted in movement compared to other years. Meanwhile, cut marks on the rope fragments showed the perpetrator replaced the restraints approximately every 8-12 months, consistent with his habit of obtaining new materials from abandoned mining areas near Henderson Lake. When examining waste in the cabin, including pencil stubs, packaged food wrappers, old newspapers, tin cans, and plastic fragments, the investigation team layered the trash by decomposition degree. Each trash layer represented a phase of activity. The old newspapers, many with printed dates, not only indicated when the perpetrator brought new items into the cabin, but also reflected the times he left to scavenge from the forest. By cross-referencing newspaper dates and ink humidity, specialists determined that between 2006-2008, the perpetrator ventured outside more frequently, nearly every 2-3 weeks, to obtain food and supplies. But from 2009, the amount of new materials dropped sharply, suggesting the perpetrator faced difficulties accessing supply sources or deliberately limited outings due to fear of detection. When analyzing fireplace ash layers, the forensic team noted varying oxidation levels each year, reflecting the frequency of fires and the type of wood used. Ash from 2006-2007 contained many cedar fragments, a type easily found around Calamity Brook, but from 2009, the ash contained more decayed oak, indicating the perpetrator relied more on old materials inside the cabin rather than foraging outside. This aligned with the assumption that he left the cabin less in the final phase. From ash samples still containing small amounts of charred protein and starch, the forensic team confirmed changes in the perpetrator's and Lily's diet over time. The first years showed traces of canned meat and carbohydrates from packaged foods, but from 2008 onward, only signs of wild seeds, forest mushrooms, and some roots that could be dug around the cabin remained. This helped explain Lily's most severe malnutrition phase, consistent with medical records. To identify periods when Lily was starved or injured, the investigation team examined dried blood samples, torn fabric pieces, and scratch marks on the cellar walls. The scratches varied in depth and wear. The forensic team used bacterial growth levels in wood crevices to estimate formation times. Results showed the deepest scratches appeared in 2007 and 2009, coinciding with periods of heavier restraint and times when ash evidence indicated the perpetrator left the cabin longer. In the cellar, there were also 3 small discontinuous bloodstains spaced horizontally, indicating Lily had been injured in her arms or legs at different times. Cross-referencing with medical data from when Lily was found, 3 old fracture sites all showed calcium deposition levels consistent with 3 distinct times, estimated around 2006, 2008, and 2010. This formed an internal injury timeline that matched changes in the perpetrator's behavior. By synthesizing the data layers, the investigation team constructed an 800-day timeline in which they could determine what Lily experienced each year. 2005-2006 was the phase when she was first placed in the cellar, restrained for long periods, and almost never allowed outside. 2007 was the phase of tight control maintenance, when Lily suffered her first severe injury. 2008-2009 was the period of food shortages and prolonged starvation. 2010 was the chaotic phase with the final serious injury, and early 2011 was when all activity traces in the cabin sharply declined, coinciding with the period when the perpetrator may have left the area or lost the ability to maintain control, enabling Lily to reappear near Long Lake. All the above data formed a complete forensic timeline, helping decode what happened during the 800 days Lily was held captive in the cabin cellar, a sequence of time in which every small detail contributed to reconstructing her life and survival under absolute control in the Adirondacks wilderness. As soon as the 800-day timeline was completed, the investigation team shifted focus to identifying the perpetrator based on all DNA samples, fingerprints, and evidence collected from the cabin and captivity cellar. The FBI laboratory at Quantico prioritized analyzing skin flakes and epithelial cells obtained from under the trapdoor, wooden handles, metal bowl, and rusted knife handle in the cabin. After running through the CODIS system, a series of matches emerged. DNA on the trapdoor handle restraints and a tin cup matched the genetic profile of an individual previously stored in the federal system. Gabriel Ruiz, male, born 1967, with prior convictions in Texas and New Mexico. This was a critical turning point because the entire investigation strategy from that point could shift to pursuing a specific suspect rather than a broad assumption. The DNA match was at 99.98%, sufficient to identify the individual under federal law. When expanding evidence analysis, the lab collected additional fingerprints from the trapdoor wood surface, indented marks on the table edge, and touch points on the cellar latch. 3 of those prints were clear enough for comparison, and yielded absolute matches with Ruiz's fingerprints stored from a 1994 arrest involving assault with a weapon. The matching DNA and fingerprints eliminated all doubt about the perpetrator's identity. Ruiz's criminal records were requested from the states where he had appeared, and a consistent behavioral picture gradually emerged. Between 1985 and 2004, Ruiz had been arrested for trespassing, assault causing injury, illegal weapon possession, and twice suspected in connection with missing women near railroad lines in Arizona and Missouri. Though lacking sufficient evidence for conviction, records described Ruiz as a drifter with no fixed occupation, frequently moving along federal railroad lines, a trait that made him hard to track. Notably, a 1998 report from Colorado stated Ruiz had been seen setting up a temporary tent in a remote forest area, about 2 miles from the main railroad line, a pattern nearly identical to how he established the hidden cabin in the Adirondacks. When cross-referencing Ruiz's movement history with the Mercer case timeline, the investigation team realized he had disappeared from his last recorded residence in early September 2005, just 4 weeks before Daniel and Lily went missing. Sparse reports from local residents that year mentioned a strange man stopping near Adirondack Lode trailhead parking lots in late September, matching Ruiz's description: thin, about 5'10", black hair to the ears, unkempt beard. Investigators also discovered in the cabin many items originating from states Ruiz had passed through, such as food can labels from a Texas factory, matches from Kentucky, and a binding cord with branding mainly distributed in Colorado. These items reinforced the judgment that the perpetrator was a long-distance drifter who traveled cross-state before settling in the Adirondacks for years. Behavioral analysts noted Ruiz's crime pattern matched what the cabin revealed: tendency for long-term captivity, ability to live in isolation for years, reclusive lifestyle, shelter-building skills, and violent behavior targeting defenseless victims. As Ruiz's file was expanded, investigators uncovered an additional key factor. From 2002 to 2004, Ruiz had worked temporary labor at a warehouse near railroad lines in New Jersey, where he had access to many cargo containers and industrial materials. This explained why some items in the cabin, especially the restraints and 3 nylon rope coils, originated from railroad shipping, consistent with Ruiz stealing materials during employment. After the perpetrator's identity was confirmed, New York State Police coordinated with the FBI to issue a statewide BOLO while activating a federal warrant for the subject: extremely dangerous, armed, no fixed location, and capable of long-term hidden survival in mountainous forest environments. Information, identification photos, physical characteristics, list of locations Ruiz had appeared, and likely travel routes were sent to all counties in New York State, as well as forwarded to neighboring states, including Vermont, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. The U.S. Marshals Service was designated as the primary unit responsible for apprehension due to the federal nature of the case and the subject's danger level. Ruiz's identity was entered into border alert systems, long-distance bus systems, and databases for homeless shelters. The investigating agency also reviewed all reports of strangers around the Adirondacks from 2005-2011 to see if anyone had inadvertently seen the perpetrator. Criminal psychologists assessed that Ruiz likely left the Adirondacks between January and April 2011, coinciding with the period the cabin showed no use, and most probably continued his habit of railroad travel. This made apprehension difficult, as the subject could have left the state or even crossed borders. At this point, the case officially entered the nationwide manhunt phase, focusing on tracking a drifter with a serious criminal history who left clear traces in the cabin but vanished from the Adirondacks just before Lily appeared. The absolute matches in DNA, fingerprints, and criminal history made Gabriel Ruiz the sole, irreplaceable suspect in the entire Mercer case. Immediately after the statewide warrant was issued, and Gabriel Ruiz's file was confirmed as the only individual directly linked to Daniel's death and Lily's 6-year captivity, New York State Police and the U.S. Marshals Service launched a large-scale capture operation spanning the High Peaks Wilderness region. Analysis from the cabin timeline showed Ruiz had left the hideout shortly before Lily was found, but he was very likely still in the Adirondacks due to no signs of transportation, no clear exit route, and a movement pattern dependent on abandoned rail lines. Based on Ruiz's prior experience, drifting along Federal Railroad lines, marshals predicted he would head back to the old rail system running through Tahawas to avoid detection on main trails. On the first day of the operation, NYSP scout teams discovered smoldering ash at a lean-to about 12 kilometers northeast of the cabin, with estimated heat suggesting it had been extinguished within the last 24 hours. In the ash pile, they found 2 partially burned cigarette butts, Camel brand, matching the cigarette remnants collected in the cabin, confirming Ruiz had just left the area but remained in the High Peaks. Around the lean-to were deep boot prints in wet soil, size about 11, matching Ruiz's shoe measurement recorded in his 1994 file. K9 units were deployed immediately to track human scent. The specialized dogs led rangers along a looping path along the forest edge toward Calamity Brook, where many rock alcoves and dry streams provided easy hiding spots for a fugitive. Along this route, scout teams found 3 more packaged food wrappers from a cheap New Jersey brand, similar to fragments in the cabin, plus a fresh knife cut on a tree trunk with blade characteristics matching the rusted knife handle found in the cabin. These signs confirmed Ruiz was moving in an arc to avoid main patrol routes deployed by NYSP along trails. As night fell, marshals set up 5 checkpoints around intersections between trails and the abandoned rail line from Tahawas toward Aden Ledge. In the rail area, infrared teams recorded fresh soil impressions and several displaced stones on the tracks, indicating someone used them to walk without touching grass, a familiar evasion technique of an experienced trace avoider. By early morning of the second day, K9s picked up stronger scent near the Henderson Lake outlet area. Investigators noted fresh cigarette smell and small charcoal marks under a fir tree, proving Ruiz was only a few hours ahead. U.S. Marshals ordered a full blockade of the abandoned rail line from the north down to Calamity, while closing access roads into the core High Peaks, especially around floodlands and Lake Colden, where Ruiz could hide in dense large tree terrain. On the second day, a search team discovered a series of new signs, handprints with tree sap on rock faces, a brown fabric thread similar to a jacket found in the cabin, and shallower footprints indicating Ruiz was weakening, likely from days without food. This shifted the operation to passive encirclement, gradually tightening the perimeter and forcing the subject into limited terrain. On the third day, at 4:52 a.m., a K9 team near the old rail line, south of Henderson Lake, detected strong human scent and led marshals into a small wind-sheltered valley. There they saw disturbed soil, indicating someone had recently sat or lain down. Foot skid marks on wet ground led southeast, crossing large roots, signs Ruiz was trying to move quickly, despite exhaustion. By 9:17 a.m., an NYSP thermal reconnaissance aircraft detected a slow-moving heat signature about 1.1 kilometers from the pursuit team. Marshals immediately deployed an assault team in silence, approaching in an arc formation. At 10:02, a marshal spotted Ruiz crouched by a dry stream, trying to get water and no longer able to run far. The arrest order was issued immediately. Ruiz fled instinctively into dense forest, but only managed about 20 meters before being subdued by 2 marshals' officers without gunfire. He was captured after 47 hours of continuous pursuit in the most difficult Adirondacks terrain. At the time of arrest, Ruiz was gaunt, clothes torn, hands calloused from climbing roots, and smelled of fresh smoke, evidence of small fires to avoid detection. A quick search recovered a folding knife with skin fragments on the blade, matching the type of tool that left cuts in the cabin. Ruiz carried no food, only a food wrapper scrap and a nearly empty lighter. The successful capture closed the most complex pursuit phase of the case and officially placed Gabriel Ruiz in custody to face investigation and criminal charges. Immediately after being escorted to the NY State Police headquarters in Ray Brook, Gabriel Ruiz was taken into a federally compliant recorded interrogation room. When read his Miranda rights, he asserted that he was not involved and just accidentally sheltering in the forest, denying all allegations. During the initial interrogation phase lasting over 3 hours, Ruiz continued to lie, claiming that he found an abandoned cabin and didn't know who Lily Mercer was, while stating that he had only been in the Adirondacks for a few months. However, the investigation team had prepared comprehensive physical, biological, and forensic evidence to confront every contradiction in his statements. The FBI presented DNA samples collected from the cabin, including epithelial cells on the trapdoor, flaked skin on the binding rope, sweat samples on the handle of the rusted knife, and saliva on the rim of the tin cup. All matched Ruiz's genetic profile with federal standard accuracy, instantly rendering his claim of just passing through worthless. When questioned about fingerprints on the trapdoor, the direct access point to Lily's underground cell, Ruiz suggested that someone might have set a trap, or that the fingerprints were from years ago. But investigators countered with analysis of ridge depth, natural oil wear on the wood surface, and localized oxidation, proving the prints were made at multiple points in time, spanning from 2006 to 2010. This meant Ruiz had been present at the cabin not just for a few months, but over multiple years. When investigators moved to shoe prints, Ruiz continued lying, claiming he wore size 10 shoes, while his 1994 arrest record clearly showed size 11. The shoe prints near the lean-to, on the hidden trail, and around the cabin all matched the size, tread depth, and wear pattern of a person weighing 165, 176 pounds, and standing 5'9" inches to 5'11", perfectly consistent with Ruiz's build. Even a dried mud sample, stuck in the tread grooves of shoes, recovered at the cabin, contained the same characteristic minerals found in the Calamity Brook area, proving Ruiz had traveled between the cabin and the main water source along the exact route the K9 team had tracked during his capture. When asked to explain the binding rope in the cellar and the loop wear marks on the nylon cord, Ruiz said he knew nothing about the rope, but his DNA was found on the knots, proving he had personally tied and untied it over many years. Additionally, the nylon was a type only available from the railroad supply depot, where Ruiz had once worked temporarily, ruling out the possibility that he had simply accidentally hidden in the forest. Examining trash recovered from the cabin, investigators traced the origins of food wrappers, can labels, and newspaper scraps from multiple states, all consistent with Ruiz's historical movement along railroad lines. When confronted with this information, Ruiz switched to silence, but his silence only reinforced the consistency of the behavioral pattern. The investigation team continued presenting microbial analyses from the cabin, bacteria on the cellar walls matched samples from Lily's skin, while the rope surface showed Ruiz's sweat intermixed with the victim's proteins, proving prolonged direct contact. When asked about the hidden cellar, Ruiz claimed he didn't dig the cellar, but the trapdoor showed wood shavings made by the very blade matching the knife found in the cabin, and wood dust in the knife's grooves perfectly corresponded to the material around the trapdoor frame. When confronted about Daniel's remains discovered behind the cabin, Ruiz denied any involvement, yet 3 blood-stained wood fragments matching Daniel's blood fit the type of wood Ruiz had used in the cabin for roof repairs and tools. One fragment also carried Ruiz's DNA, proving he had handled the murder weapon or moved evidence after the crime. The FBI also presented ash decomposition data from the cabin, showing Ruiz maintained continuous presence from late 2005 to 2010. The years Lily was held captive. When asked why ash appeared consistently over more than 6 winters, Ruiz offered no reasonable answer. The cell tower analysis team, covering nearby areas, found no device belonging to Ruiz, but confirmed no evidence that the cabin had been used by multiple individuals. This reinforced the conclusion that Ruiz was the sole occupant over many years. When all evidence was presented, Ruiz changed tactics, claiming someone else used the cabin before, or I only arrived later. But this was refuted by his DNA and fingerprints appearing on the newest surface layers, the marks left in the final years. Investigators noted that Ruiz maintained the typical lying pattern of long-term captivity offenders: absolute denial, blaming others, and minimizing involvement. However, the entire body of physical evidence formed a coherent, irrefutable chain. After 17 hours of interrogation, Ruiz stopped cooperating, but it no longer mattered. The case file was sufficient for prosecution. NY State Police immediately finalized a comprehensive report, including biological evidence, crime scene forensics, forensic timeline, and behavioral data. The file was forwarded to both the U.S. Attorney's Office and the New York State Prosecutor for charges at both levels: state level for murder and unlawful imprisonment, and federal level for kidnapping a minor and transporting the victim across federal jurisdiction in the High Peaks Wilderness. This officially moved the Mercer case into the criminal prosecution phase, where all evidence collected from the cabin, cellar, and surrounding area would be presented in court to establish Gabriel Ruiz's responsibility for the entire chain of events from 2005 to 2011. The trial of Gabriel Ruiz was held at the New York State Supreme Court in Essex County, with participation from state prosecutors, federal prosecutors, and a court-appointed defense team. From the very first day, the jury was asked to consider a 6-year-long case built on a complex chain of forensic evidence and a crime scene located deep in the High Peaks Wilderness. Prosecutors presented the entire evidence chain in forensic order, starting with the cabin, the central hub of the crimes. Crime scene photos of the cabin clearly showed roof repairs, multi-layered fireplace ash, personal items, and especially the trapdoor leading to the secret cellar. Ruiz's DNA samples were directly compared on large screens with samples taken from the trapdoor handle, binding rope, and metal eating bowl, forming an undeniable chain confirming Ruiz's continuous presence in the cabin from 2005 to 2011. The forensic pathologist from the investigation team presented tissue samples, epithelial cells, and nylon fiber aging analysis to the jury, confirming the rope had been used cyclically over many years. A ranger, who had participated in the cellar examination, was called to describe the cramped structure with no windows, only a small ventilation hole, and binding marks corresponding to Lily's long-term injuries. Next, SARA investigators were called as witnesses to detail the tracking steps involving knife cuts, soil samples, pollen samples, and debris that helped locate the cabin area. Topographic maps showing trails concealed with pine branches, secret paths, and lean-to sites with fresh ash were presented in detail. Prosecutors emphasized that Ruiz did not merely appear at the cabin, but maintained a consistent movement pattern over years, proving intentional control and captivity. Regarding Daniel Mercer's death, the forensic expert presented autopsy results on the remains: multiple rib fractures, blunt force skull trauma with no signs of healing, confirming death shortly after the attack. The blood-stained wood fragments carrying Daniel's blood and Ruiz's DNA were used by prosecutors as key evidence for the murder charge. And 800-day forensic timeline was displayed as a visual timeline. Each ash layer, trash item, utensil, rope replacement frequency, and stove usage proved Lily's continuous captivity in the cellar. Prosecutors argued that the entire evidence chain formed a logical, seamless structure that could not be replaced by any alternative hypothesis other than Ruiz being the sole perpetrator. Ruiz pleaded not guilty, continuing to lie that the cabin wasn't mine and the cellar I never opened. But when prosecutors showed fingerprint analysis with 3 absolute match points, the defense could not rebut it. The defense attorney attempted to argue that Ruiz lacked the mental capacity for prolonged captivity, but mental health records and the cabin living pattern proved the opposite. He planned, sustained survival for years, and tightly controlled his environment. The final witnesses were the Marshals investigators involved in Ruiz's capture. They described the still-warm stove, fresh cigarette butts, and food wrappers from New Jersey, all reinforcing that Ruiz continued his old nomadic pattern. When the defense tried to question whether the cabin could have been used by multiple people, prosecutors immediately presented microbial analysis results from the cabin, sweat, skin cells, and DNA from only 2 individuals, Ruiz and Lily, with no third source. After nearly 3 weeks of trial and 2 days of deliberation, the jury unanimously voted 12/12 to find Gabriel Ruiz guilty on 3 felony counts: murder in the 2nd degree for Daniel Mercer, kidnapping in the 1st degree for Lily Mercer, and unlawful imprisonment in the 1st degree lasting over 6 years. The New York State Supreme Court judge sentenced Ruiz to life imprisonment without parole, citing the brutality, prolonged captivity, and permanent harm to the victim as aggravating factors. After sentencing, the court ordered the cabin sealed, the entire structure demolished, and the surrounding area within a 2-mile radius closed to ensure no one could access or turn the site into an attraction. The demolition was coordinated with the Department of Environmental Conservation to restore the Adirondacks forest to its natural state and completely erase all traces of the crime scene. The trial concluded with Ruiz being escorted from the courtroom and the case file transferred to federal authorities for archiving as one of the most serious long-term captivity cases ever to occur in the Adirondack Mountains. Immediately after the trial, all focus shifted to the health recovery and societal reintegration of Lily Mercer, who had endured more than 6 years of captivity in an underground cellar in the Adirondacks. She was placed in a long-term therapy program at a specialized center for victims of prolonged abductions, staffed by psychologists, trauma therapists, nutritionists, and social support teams providing close monitoring. The initial therapy sessions focused on addressing post-traumatic stress disorder, chronic insomnia, panic triggered by enclosed spaces, and eating disorders resulting from years of malnutrition. Doctors noted Lily exhibited strong light sensitivity, difficulty interacting with strangers, and a tendency to shrink into room corners at sudden noises, all consistent with medical records indicating prolonged confinement in a cramped, naturally light-deprived space. The therapy team built a multi-phase recovery plan, first stabilizing nutrition and sleep, then rebuilding basic life skills, and finally restoring social interaction abilities. For the first 2 years after rescue, Lily lived in a high-security facility to avoid excessive media attention, ensuring a safe environment for recovery without disruption. On the family side, Lily's mother and 2 relatives decided to relocate to Vermont, leaving the Adirondacks area filled with painful memories. They chose a small town near Burlington with quality mental health services and a peaceful living environment. There, they rented a small house near Lake Champlain, trying to rebuild a normal life while paying special attention to Lily's progress. The family also participated in guidance programs for parents and relatives of victims, helping them understand how to support Lily through each therapy stage without unintentionally triggering anxiety responses. Alongside supporting Lily, New York State Police and Adirondack Park Agency rangers conducted a full review of search procedures and hiker management protocols. The Mercer case revealed that popular trails like Indian Pass or Avalanche Pass still had signal dead zones and many deep forest areas lacking regular oversight. As a result, safety regulations were updated, mandatory personal locator beacons for entry into the High Peaks region, increased checkpoints at trailheads, improved public topographic maps with clear danger warnings, and added seasonal patrols in areas with histories of illegal squatting. Rangers also organized advanced training on long-term missing person searches, incorporating microbial analysis, soil sampling, and human survival signs, techniques developed directly from Lily's case. As Lily's recovery stabilized, the Mercer file was officially closed by NY State Police and moved to long-term storage. Although all evidence had been presented in court and Ruiz sentenced to life without parole, the file serves as a key reference in state investigation training courses. It is regarded as one of the rare cases combining environmental forensics, criminal behavior analysis, and multi-year terrain searches. In the 5-7 years following the trial, Lily made significant progress. She could sleep in rooms with open curtains, no longer feared open spaces, and began taking craft classes to help her body readjust to normal rhythms. However, certain memories still triggered reactions to loud impacts or heavy footsteps. According to her therapists, these responses would take many years to fully subside, but Lily demonstrated remarkable resilience. About 10 years after her rescue, Lily was strong enough to take an important step, joining a victim support program run by a non-profit organization, where she became a peer counselor for others who had endured similar experiences. Lily did not share details of what happened in the cabin, but she spoke about the recovery journey, facing daily fears, and rebuilding a personally meaningful life. Through these shares, many other victims found motivation to move forward. She also assisted in designing training materials for rescue and investigation personnel, helping them understand how to approach long-term captivity survivors without causing further trauma. Regarding the Mercer family, though Daniel was gone forever, they chose to honor him by establishing a fund to support missing persons searches in the wilderness, providing free locator beacons to youth groups and hiking families. The Daniel Mercer Fund became one of the highly regarded community programs in Vermont and New York. After many years of therapy, Lily began part-time studies at a community college near Burlington, majoring in applied psychology. Though the road ahead remains long and the past cannot be completely erased, she has stepped out of the darkness of those 1,800 days of captivity and rebuilt her life on her own terms. From a young girl who survived in a wooden cabin deep in the Adirondacks forest, Lily became a symbol of resilience and proof that even in the most desperate circumstances, people can still find their way back to life and meaning. Thanks to the coordination of investigative forces, prosecutors, and community support, the Mercer case closed not only with a sentence for the perpetrator, but also with the victim's rebirth, a journey that continues to this day. The story of the Mercer case in the Adirondacks forest is not just a personal tragedy, but also reflects a reality very close to everyday life in the United States today. Despite increasingly modern security systems, rescue infrastructure, and technology, families, hikers, and communities still face hidden dangers from both nature and human threats. The case of Daniel and Lily shows that inadequate preparation and the belief that everything will be fine can lead to irreversible consequences. Notably, even though Daniel had forest experience, he did not carry a PLB or satellite locator device, a detail that made the 2005 search efforts extremely difficult. This is a practical lesson for millions of Americans who love hiking in wilderness areas like the High Peaks, Rocky Mountains, or Sierra Nevada. A locator device is essential insurance, not an option. Additionally, the nomadic lifestyle and rail line movement pattern of the perpetrator Gabriel Ruiz highlight a concerning reality. Opportunistic offenders with violent histories can sometimes drift across states unnoticed, especially when living outside societal systems. This serves as a reminder that communities should remain vigilant when spotting strangers exhibiting unusual behavior at trailheads, campgrounds, parking lots, or public cabins. Early reporting can prevent another serious crime. Lily's resilience also offers an important lesson. Recovery from trauma is a long process requiring ongoing support from family, community, and professionals. In the United States, where trauma therapy centers and victim support organizations operate strongly, seeking help is an act of courage, not weakness. Finally, from the way NY Rangers changed safety policies after the case, it is clear that systems only improve when learning from mistakes. The same holds true for individuals. We are only truly safe when we face risks head-on, prepare thoroughly, and act responsibly toward ourselves and those we love. Thank you for joining me to the end of this haunting yet hopeful journey. If Lily's story touched you, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other important true crime cases. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring essential survival lessons and awareness needed in today's world.